Sometimes, the silence after a win is louder than any failure I've ever heard. That thought clung to me as I sat in Monday's leadership meeting, still replaying last night's final congratulations email from Glenmar's CEO. I'd just closed the company's biggest renewal of the year, $4.2 million, after 3 exhausting weeks of negotiation, troubleshooting, and last-minute technical fixes that no one else had the patience or knowledge to handle. My name is Lily Tran. I'm not in sales, nor do I hold a flashy title. I'm a systems integration lead, the one they call when everything's on fire and no one wants to get burned. This wasn't the first time I'd pulled the company out of a crisis. It was the third, and it was the hardest. I'd worked late into too many nights, eaten dinner at my desk more times than I could count. And worst of all, I'd canceled a flight to Florida to visit my mother in the hospital. She told me to stay, told me it was okay. They'll see what you did. Lily, they'll appreciate it. I believed her. So when I walked into that conference room, sleep-deprived but hopeful, I wasn't expecting a parade, just acknowledgement. Alan, our VP of Operations, pulled up a slide titled Q2 Highlights. The Glenmar logo sat at the center, big and bold. He smiled. Thanks to our amazing sales division, we've secured a major multi-million-dollar renewal that sets the tone for a strong third quarter. The room clapped. 3 names appeared beneath the logo. I wasn't one of them. I didn't blink, didn't move. I just folded my hands over the edge of the table and kept my expression calm. But something inside me shifted, subtly, and permanently. At the very bottom of the slide, in tiny font I almost missed, Implementation Lead, L. Tran. That was it. No mention, no nod, no voice saying, "She saved us." And in that moment, a quiet question formed in the back of my mind. Not loud, not angry, just clear enough to echo. Maybe it was never about the work. I thought the worst part was being overlooked. I was wrong. The worst part came 2 days later. At a meeting they labeled as routine. It started at 7:42 in the morning, early enough to signal importance, but informal enough to lower expectations. Alan always liked that kind of balance. Keep people off guard, keep control. The conference room was unusually quiet, sun leaking in through half-closed blinds. I took my usual seat, second from the end. Close enough to be seen, but far enough not to appear eager. I had barely sat down when Alan walked in. Latte in hand, sleeves rolled just above the elbows like he always did when he wanted to appear approachable. He didn't bother with greetings. "Let's jump in," he said, flipping open his laptop. "Before we talk deliverables, I want to clear the air about something." My heart picked up speed. It wasn't just the Glenmar deal on my mind. I had submitted a formal request for salary review the night before, respectfully worded, backed with numbers. 3 major project saves, 14% above average client retention. I even included a testimonial quote from Glenmar's CTO. Alan didn't mention the memo, instead. He looked directly at me. "If you're here to ask for a raise again, Lily," he said casually, "don't bother." I stared back. Expression neutral, even as heat flushed through my chest. "We all make sacrifices," he added, with a shrug. "It's not about recognition. It's about loyalty." I opened my mouth, then closed it again, not because I didn't have words, but because none of them would have mattered. Not here, not now. The silence in the room thickened. I looked around, searching for any kind of reaction, maybe confusion, sympathy, even awkward discomfort. But they were all blank, except one, Jordan. We used to grab lunch twice a week, vent about deadlines, complain about how Alan took credit for our work. He had been the first to text congratulations when I saved the Westfield account. Now, he looked down at the table, pretending to read a paper that wasn't there. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That hit harder than Alan's voice. I folded my hands in my lap, let my shoulders relax, and nodded once as if I understood. But inside, something cracked a little deeper. That day, I didn't just lose a raise. I lost the illusion that I was part of a team. And in that quiet, artificial room, surrounded by people I once called colleagues, I realized I wasn't just undervalued. I was completely alone. I didn't slam any doors, didn't fire off a bitter email, didn't even vent to my mother when she called that night from the hospital, asking how work was going. I told her everything was fine. It was a lie wrapped in routine, just like the smile I wore as I sat at my kitchen table at 9:07 that evening, laptop open, hands steady. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way people expect when someone gets humiliated in front of their team. No. What I felt was colder, sharper, more calculated, because while Alan believed I'd slink off quietly like so many before me, I knew better than to leave without a plan. I clicked open a folder I hadn't touched in weeks, but had been building for nearly 8 months. ArcLight. What started as a side experiment, just a cleaner, smarter interface to manage client communications, had grown into something alive. I didn't plan to build a product. I just needed something that worked. Our internal system was clunky, outdated, and worst of all, prone to crashing at critical moments. So I started designing something of my own, on weekends, late nights, and during those long on-call shifts when the systems team forgot to show up, piece by piece. I coded functions they said would take quarters to implement. And then one night, when Glenmar's portal froze hours before a compliance deadline, and no one from IT was responding, I used the prototype. No approvals, no red tape, just a quiet override. I stayed on the phone with their CTO for 43 minutes, walking him through a system no one else in my company even knew existed. It worked. The next morning, Glenmar sent one line in response. Whatever that was, we'd use that over your official system any day. I never showed it to Alan, never mentioned it in a meeting. I wasn't ready, but that night, staring at the glowing interface of ArcLight, I knew I was closer than I realized. All this time, I'd been giving them my solutions, my overtime, my silence. But this one thing, this system, was still mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. They had overlooked me again. But what they never saw? I was already building the way out. Quietly, precisely, and entirely on my own terms. I hadn't planned to revisit the past that night, but once I opened ArcLight, memories started slipping in like background noise I couldn't turn off. They came back to me, not the meetings or emails, but the faces, the voices, the late-night calls that shouldn't have come to me, but always did. Westfield. That crisis hit like a meteor. A back-end payment integration failed mid-quarter, stalling invoices for over 90% of their operations. Panic broke loose. Sales blamed engineering. Engineering blamed finance. Legal nearly walked. Everyone froze. Except me. I stayed on the call with their CFO until 1:53 in the morning, manually processing batch payments while patching a system no one else even understood. By dawn, Westfield's CEO emailed Alan a thank you, but I knew who he meant it for. What he said to me, privately, would stay etched in my mind forever. You didn't just fix the system, Lily, you saved our reputation. Then came Pinnacle. They were preparing to cancel their contract after 3 years of dissatisfaction. A 37-page complaint file sat unread in someone's inbox for weeks. By the time it landed on mine, it was already on fire, instead of dodging. I called their head of compliance directly. No script, no PR. I listened, then rebuilt their reporting flow in 10 days. Custom-coded, transparent, clean. At the next client review, he pulled me aside and said, "This is the first time I've felt heard in 2 years. You're the reason we stayed." And finally, Glenmar. The most recent and the hardest. The deal was on life support. Their tech lead had lost trust in our delivery timeline. Legal was drafting an exit clause. The night I saved that contract, I was running a fever, sitting on the floor of my apartment with my laptop propped on a box of tissues. I rebuilt the integration endpoint while coughing between lines of code. I remember his words when we finally signed the new deal. "Lily, we trust you. Not, we trust your team. Not your company. Just me." That sentence rang in my ears now with a different tone. Less flattery. More warning. I had never noticed how direct their loyalty had been. How personal. And I had never asked why that scared Alan so much. Until I saw the report. It was buried in a shared folder I accidentally stumbled on while gathering numbers for ArcLight's early projections. A slide deck labeled Q2 Recovery Strategy, Sales Depth. Inside were charts, client success timelines, and my work, my numbers, my deliverables, my timelines, all color-coded and credited to sales project leads, consolidated. No names, just repackaged effort. Mine. At first, I felt that familiar burn of insult, but it didn't last, because now, I was no longer waiting to be noticed. I was watching the pieces align, quietly, perfectly, towards something bigger. They thought I was the bridge between their systems and the clients, but they didn't realize I was also the one holding the weight, and I had just decided I wouldn't carry it for them anymore. The day after I found that report, I couldn't sleep. I'd stared at the ceiling until nearly 4 a.m, heart pounding with questions I didn't know how to answer. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was what came next. Did I keep pretending this system worked for me? Or did I finally step outside of it? That afternoon, I messaged someone who'd always been straight with me, Marcus Lee, the lead systems architect at Pinnacle Ventures. We had worked closely through the last crisis. During the rebuild, he'd always respected boundaries, but also asked smart, sharp questions most clients never dared to. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe tucked behind a bookstore, 2 blocks off the main road, the kind of place where no one wore badges and no one listened too closely. I got there early and ordered black coffee. Strong, no sugar, the kind that could anchor a storm. Marcus arrived right on time, button-down sleeves rolled, laptop bag slung carelessly over one shoulder. A small scar peeking from the edge of his jawline I hadn't noticed before. We made small talk, projects, server stress loads, mutual jokes about enterprise chaos. But then I leaned in slightly, dropped my voice, and asked the question that had been sitting like fire in my chest for days. If I ever left, I said, and built something better, would you follow it? He didn't answer immediately. He studied me the way an engineer does when staring down a blueprint, assessing its flaws, measuring its weight. Then he smiled. Soft and a little sad. "You mean, would we ditch our current provider for your thing?" I nodded once. He didn't blink. "If you built it?" he said. "Yeah." No hesitation. And then, without ceremony, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cream-colored card. Nothing fancy, just handwriting in dark ink across the center. "Whatever you build, I'm in. No signatures, no noise. ML." I turned it over in my hand. The back was blank, no logo, no title, just space. And yet, it felt heavier than anything I'd carried in weeks. Something in my chest, long coiled tight, began to loosen. Maybe I wasn't just reacting to what they'd done to me. Maybe. Finally. I was responding to something I had built for myself. Marcus stood to leave, pausing with his hand on the chair. "Just make it clean," he added. "Make it fast, and don't waste time trying to fix what they broke." I nodded, card still in hand. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. That little rectangle of ink and paper said everything. I wrote the email at 8:02 in the morning and hovered over the send button for exactly 13 seconds. Not because I was unsure, I wasn't, but because some part of me still wanted it to feel bigger than it did. The text was short, clinical, not cold, but clear. Subject: Formal resignation. Effective immediately. I won't need a counteroffer, just my exit paperwork. That was it. No farewell, no apology, no explanation. I hit send at 8:15, closed my laptop, and stared at the muted screen. The strange thing wasn't the relief. It was how quiet the room felt once I'd done it. There were no fireworks, no deep breath of freedom, just stillness. Like the moment right after a storm passes, when the pressure breaks, and you realize you'd been holding your body tight for so long. You forgot what it felt like to let go. I stood up, stretched my arms over my head, and made a cup of tea, mint and ginger. Something I hadn't had time to enjoy in months. I didn't rush, didn't check my phone, didn't open Slack or Outlook again by 9:30. I still hadn't heard a thing. No response, no confirmation, no thank you for your service. Not even an automatic out-of-office reply from HR. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. I went for a walk around the block, the October wind catching my coat, stinging my cheeks. I passed the office building where I used to spend 12-hour days and $3 coffees. I didn't look up. Back at my apartment, I checked my inbox one more time. Still nothing. Not a single name from that company had reached out. And maybe that was what made the goodbye real. Not the resignation itself, but the silence that followed. The vacuum of care. The confirmation that my absence created no ripple, no disruption worth acknowledging. And yet, strangely, I didn't cry, because deep down, I had known this for a long time. My presence was only valued when it made their lives easier, not because of who I was, not because of what I built, but because I could patch holes, delay disasters, and stay quiet when it mattered most. To them, now that I was no longer useful, I was invisible. I poured another cup of tea and opened the ArcLight folder again. Not to code. Not yet. But just to look. To remind myself that I had something of my own now. Something no one had repackaged, renamed, or forgotten. A quiet beginning. One they wouldn't see coming. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone speak over it. I logged out of my company account one final time. No fanfare, no second thoughts, just silence. Mine. Finally, it started at exactly 3:06 in the afternoon, just as I was closing the lid of my laptop after a call with Glenmar's migration team. My phone buzzed once. A single message. Jordan, 2:37 in the afternoon. It's chaos here. They know it's you, and they're terrified. I read it twice, then smiled. Just a twitch of the lips. Not triumph, not gloating. Just confirmation. I made no reply. Back at the office, I'd left less than 48 hours ago. Alan was unraveling. Apparently, Westfield's head of operations had emailed that morning, notifying the company that they were re-evaluating the scope of continued engagement and would not be renewing the service agreement for Q4. But that wasn't the worst of it. Within 2 hours, Pinnacle and Glenmar sent nearly identical messages, phrased differently, timed just far enough apart to avoid suspicion, but unmistakably coordinated. 3 of the company's largest clients had, in corporate language, said the same thing. We're done here. Alan, ever the showman under pressure, didn't keep his cool this time. He stormed from office to office, barking questions no one could answer. Who spoke to Westfield last? Why wasn't I informed about this sooner? Where's the retention forecast report? He kicked over a recycling bin, slammed a hand on someone's desk, demanded numbers that didn't exist. And while I wasn't there to witness it in person, the images were vivid in my head as I stared out the cafe window, sipping on warm jasmine tea. I imagined his face, flush with panic, jaw clenched, shirt collar a little too tight now that the cracks had started to show. My phone buzzed again. Jordan, 3:12 in the afternoon. HR is pulling up every active contract. Something about breach risk. They're scrambling. Lily! Scrambling. A word I used to associate with 2 a.m. Server outages and weekend all-hands meetings I was voluntold into. Back then, I was the one scrambling, to fix, to please, to prove. Now, I was still centered, watching the fallout unfold, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, earned calm. They hadn't seen me walk out with anything because I hadn't taken papers, data, or secrets. What I carried with me couldn't be boxed. It was trust. And now, trust had walked out the door with me, 3 clients, 3 doors closed, all without a single shouted word. I looked back at Jordan's last message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a second, I considered typing something, maybe a one-word reply. Good? Or maybe just a smiley face, but I didn't. Some victories are best savored in silence. And in that silence, I knew something for certain. I hadn't burned their house down. They'd simply pulled the wrong beams, and I'd quietly taken the foundation with me. At exactly 12:01 in the morning, I pressed enter. The ArcLight servers lit up, silent and clean, every process humming in harmony, no confetti, no launch party, no staged LinkedIn post, just a quiet flicker on my screen, and a single green status bar reading, Leave. I sat alone in my apartment, soft instrumental music playing low in the background. The same playlist I used to loop during overnight system recoveries. Only this time, I wasn't fixing anyone's mess. I was building my own beginning. There was no press release, no announcement on social media. I didn't tag anyone, didn't tell anyone outside of the 3 who already knew, because it wasn't built for noise. It was built for trust. Exactly 1 minute later, I sent out 3 identical emails. Subject: Access credentials. ArcLight welcome. Your platform is now active. Login instructions and data sandbox are below. 1 went to Westfield, 1 to Pinnacle, 1 to Glenmar. There were no logos in the footer, no corporate branding, just a clean white interface, trimmed in grayscale, with only 1 line beneath the welcome message, built for those who were never just another account. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle into my spine. For months, I'd carried the anxiety of building something in the dark, wondering if it would work, if it would crash, if I'd crash. But in that moment, everything was still. At 12:42, I got the first ping. Westfield had logged in. Then, Pinnacle. No emails, no questions, just activity. Real, live interaction. A product that had started as late-night sketches on the back of utility bills, now running mission-critical operations for 3 multi-million-dollar clients. And then came the real moment. At exactly 1:06 in the morning, the Glenmar system sent a single confirmation packet through our API, then another, then a full batch. Within 2 minutes, their legacy platform was dark. They had migrated, quietly, completely, and without even picking up the phone. No warning, no request for support, just trust. Executed silently. I stared at the screen, watching the data fly across the dashboard. This wasn't revenge. It was precision. This wasn't about beating anyone. It was about building something no one could take credit for but me. And for the first time in my entire career, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I was standing exactly where I meant to be. No stage, no spotlight, but power. Finally, on my terms. ArcLight had gone live, and so had I. By the time the sun rose, ArcLight had stabilized across all 3 platforms. There were no outages, no flagged tickets, no onboarding confusion, just uptime, pure, quiet performance. I was on my 3rd cup of tea by the time the first call came in. 9:02 in the morning. Unknown number. I didn't answer. The second came at 9:24. Same caller. I let it ring again, watched the screen until it dimmed. By the time the 3rd call buzzed at 10:01, I already knew who it was. I flipped my phone over on the desk. Face down. The name didn't matter, but I knew the voice on the other end would be Calder Morris, CEO of the company I had just walked away from. The man who had once nodded at me in elevators but never asked what I actually did. The one who only learned my name when Glenmar renewed their $4. $2 million contract, and forgot it the moment the ink dried. At 10:45. A new email arrived. Subject: Open to a discussion center, C. Morris, CC. Legal counsel, Lily. We're open to a strategic conversation if you're willing to explore how we might work together again, perhaps through a partnership. Please let us know a convenient time to connect. The message was polished, respectful, desperate. I didn't respond, instead. I forwarded it to my assistant. Please draft the following reply. I wrote. The response was only one line. No further correspondence. Please redirect all inquiries to our legal team. She sent it within the hour. I didn't think about it again. That afternoon, while reviewing a server diagnostic report, another email came through. This one from a different name. A different world entirely. Subject: Keynote invitation, Fall Tech and Future Conference. Lily Tran, your recent launch of ArcLight has been recognized by several members of our advisory board. We would be honored to have you join this year's panel on disruptive innovation as a featured speaker. I blinked at the screen. They hadn't asked about my credentials. They didn't want to know which company I'd left, or why. They had seen the product, they had seen the shift, and they wanted me. I accepted the invitation within 5 minutes, not because I needed the exposure, but because I had something to say. And now, people were finally willing to listen on my terms. Back at my desk, I reopened the ArcLight dashboard. Everything was running, smooth, stable, silent. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't dragged anyone through the mud. But I'd answered them all the same, not with noise, not with rage, but with the kind of silence that makes people sit up and lean in. The room was brighter than I expected. Natural light spilled across the stage from wide glass panels behind the media pit. Rows of reporters, panelists, and industry professionals filled the seats like clockwork. Smart suits, sharper eyes, all waiting for the story behind the story. The ArcLight logo glowed softly on the wall behind me. No dramatic music, no slideshow, just quiet confidence. This wasn't a product launch. That had already happened. This was a moment. I stepped up to the podium and adjusted the mic. The murmur in the room stilled instantly, like someone had closed a door on the noise. I spoke about ArcLight's architecture, about why efficiency didn't have to come at the cost of clarity, about how client systems deserved more than patch jobs and empty apologies. I answered technical questions, ethical ones, and even a few skeptical ones, until the final hand went up. A woman from a tech media outlet stood slowly, not aggressive, just curious. "Lily," she asked, "why did you do it? Why walk away and build something like this on your own?" There was a pause. A long one. I let the silence settle, not out of nerves, but because I wanted every word to count. Then, I answered, calmly, steadily. "They thought clients were loyal to a name," I said, "but clients remember the hand that reached out when no one else did." The room was silent for a beat longer than necessary. Then came the applause. Not the explosive kind, but the grounded kind. The kind that says, "We get it. We've seen it too." I stepped off the stage without waiting for the cameras to follow. Down the side hallway, past the catering tables and equipment cases, was a wide glass wall that looked out across the city skyline. I paused there for a moment. Below me, across the avenue, stood the office building I used to call home. 5th floor, operations, where I had pulled late nights, fought silent wars, fixed systems with my name left off the credits. Now, the lights on that floor were out, no movement inside. just shadows, like it had all already faded, before anyone even noticed. In the polished tile below me, my reflection blended with the Arclight logo on the wall behind me. For a second, I saw it all at once. What I left behind, what I carried forward, and what I finally built for myself. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just breathed, fully, freely, finally. I turned from the glass, walked back toward the elevator, and never once looked back. The company I had saved 3 times no longer existed in my world. But Arclight had just begun. In the end, Lily's story isn't just about revenge or redemption. It's about reclaiming value in a world that so often overlooks quiet strength. She didn't fight with noise. She didn't plead for recognition. She built something better, something of her own, and let the results speak louder than any boardroom ever could. Her journey is a reminder to all of us. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to burn bridges to rise. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to walk away with your dignity intact and let your work create the echo they can't ignore. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or undervalued, remember this. You don't owe anyone your silence, your exhaustion, or your brilliance on demand. You owe yourself the chance to start again, on your own terms. And if Lily's story moved you, if it reminded you of your own quiet power, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs that reminder. Comment your thoughts below. Your story might be the next spark. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that speak for the ones who once stayed quiet. Your voice matters. Let's make sure it's heard.